everyone. Welcome to another FIDE's Heart and Soul podcast. I'm joined here today by Daniel Torres, who is the campus minister at CTK,
Yes.
Christ the King Catholic High School.
CTK. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be talking about marriage and the sacrament of marriage and what that means to us as Catholics and how we can live that out. Just a disclosure, we will be talking a little bit about sexuality. So if you have kids around, probably don't have them around right now because we are going to be talking about more adult stuff. So this is more directed to the parents, as I said in our heart and soul issue. So just keep that in mind as we listen to this podcast. Looking forward to it. So, Daniel, how are you?
I'm good, man. It's been a week, it's been a day, but it's good to be here. I always love coming to Sacred Heart because, like, the drive up is kind of long and laborious, and like people might get annoyed by that, but I love it because, like, especially like now, it's like golden hour, the sun setting. It's just like beautiful. It's like I'm going to like heaven.
That is exactly what it feels like every time I drive to work. It's just going up that hill.
No, it's good to be with you, and we spent a lot of time in college together, and like it was good to. And since then, we haven't been able to spend a lot of time, but it's good to kind of sit down and talk and hang out.
It's great to have you, Cameron. Yeah. And how's work going?
Good. The school's beautiful. We have close to 400 students, so still on like the smaller side compared to other schools, but it's a really beautiful place. The families there like really care about a true, good, beautiful education. Faculty and staff are just incredible, witnesses to the faith. They're not just teachers and experts in their field, but they tie everything back to Jesus. And so it makes my job easier because my job as a coordinator of campus ministry is to help our kids pray and to strive for holiness. And if you have like the other teachers kind of working towards that in the classes and tying everything back to Jesus in their topics, it helps, It
makes a big difference there.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I have Daniel on here is, just so you know, we are actually doing two podcasts on marriage. We're doing one on theology, on the theology of marriage, and then the next one we're actually doing a practical interview where we're interviewing a couple of the parish to talk about their marriage and how they live out their Catholic marriage.
Beautiful.
So I have Daniel today, who is a theologian.
Well, yeah, and sorts, yeah. If you call an undergrad in theology a theologian, I guess so, yeah.
I'm still an undergrad too.
Right,
I'm working on my master's, but we'll get there.
There you go.
But you do understand the role of marriage very well, and I've seen you live it out in your marriage, so it's very helpful to have someone who has a theology background and also living it out.
Yeah.
So let's just get started with this and
getting into
how it goes. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So if you can just tell our audience a little bit about what is marriage, and why is marriage in the Catholic Church considered a sacrament?
Yeah. Marriage is one of those interesting things, right? Because, it's always existed, right? Even before Jesus. It wasn't, Jesus raised it as a sacrament, but it has always been a thing that we've done as human beings. It's almost like in our hearts, we know marriage is supposed to happen, right? Since the beginning of time. And so, and that's like a popular question in today's culture, right? Is what is marriage? Especially when you get into the secular world, people are asking, well, why can't, there be same-sex marriage? Why can't people have marriage like with several spouses and things like that, so that's a popular question nowadays is what is the essence of marriage? Is it just a lifelong partnership between two people that love each other? Well, I love my mom. I'm not going to marry my mom. I love my dog. I'm not going to marry my dog.
That's a good thing.
But that's the question, right? What is marriage? And I think the church has the most beautiful truth in regards to what marriage is between one man and one woman. And like I said, that's been around since the beginning of time, but Jesus raised it to the level of a sacrament, meaning that it is an outward sign of an inward grace, right? That's what whenever we tie sacrament, we think about that. The sign being the couple, the man and the wife, and the love that they have between them, right? That inward sign is really pointing to the love of God. And when you think about it, like if you look at scripture begins like with matrimony and it ends with matrimony, right? In the beginning, right, God created Adam and Eve, male and female. He created them, right? And there's a complementarity just in how they're created and how they go together, right? And then at the end of scripture in Revelation, it's a wedding feast, right? Heaven is this wedding feast. And so it points to this reality that, just as human beings, like we're made for communion, we're made for a relationship with God, almost to the point of marriage, right? It's St. Paul in Ephesians 5 when he talks about marriage. He's describing marriage and the relationship between husband and wife and submitting to one another and the kind of that relationship. But he says ultimately it points to the relationship that Christ has with his church, which I've always found to be profound. Like even if you look at the Old Testament, it shows like when the Israelite people, right, when they're trying to pursue God, and sometimes when they're running away from God, making mistakes, that relationship, God describes Israel almost like as a harlot, almost a prostitute, right? When they decide to run away from God, it's like, oh, you've run away, almost as like you're committing adultery, right? So since like the beginning, we've known this relationship ultimately with God, almost like as a marriage. But yeah, in the church, we believe it to be this union between one man, one woman, for their lives till death do they part, right? And it's for their own sanctification and the sanctification, hopefully, of the children that they bear and bringing it into life, because true love creates, right? God is a God of love. He is total love, right? And so when he can't help but create, right? And bring goodness into the world. And so marriage kind of reflects that reality where the true love that exists there, that union, hopefully, brings and participates in that creation, bringing in new children. So I guess those are some elements to kind of get the ball started.
Yeah, and I mean, that's definitely a good introduction to what marriage is, right? I mean, first thing we see in Scripture is, or at least the first time we see marriage in Scripture is in Genesis, when God makes a man and woman, and he created them to be fruitful and multiply, right? So that really shows us the center of what marriage is in the Catholic Church and how important it is and how elevated it is, right? How central it is to the faith and to Scripture.
Yeah.
So that just revealed everything. If Scripture is the sacred word of God and he's making that a central point of Scripture, then we know it's something sacred, and that's why it's elevated to the sacrament.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. And so one thing I think our audience might want to know about is, I mean, we know marriage between a man and woman. We know, which we'll talk about in a little bit, just to go a little bit more deeper into that, what that means. But I can get married at a courthouse, right? Or I can get married like on a ship, like in the office.
Right.
Pam and Jim getting married on a boat. But in the Catholic Church, you can't do that, right? So what makes a Catholic marriage different than other marriages?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? And a lot of people will, wonder about that, especially when they hear that, in the Catholic tradition, right? Jesus says that there's no divorce, right? That's another element, and we see even today that marriage is kind of filled with divorce in the world. We see like unfortunately that's like a reality of breaking away from that marriage. So what makes a marriage Catholic, right? What makes it truly good and beautiful? I would say that there are a few conditions, right? And a lot of people might see the Catholic view of marriage as like, oh, it's too elevated, it's too high of a bar, right? I think that's the point of it, though, is if it's really like a sacrament to the service of others and to sanctify the people, it should be kind of a high bar. So in order to get married, there should be some conditions kind of in play. I think the things that we turn to mostly are this idea of freedom. You need to be free to marry, right? So if you've made any conditioned vows to other people or promises, or you're in a state of life where you're not really free to marry, it wouldn't be like a good marriage, right? So at least in the Latin tradition, right, a priest right can't marry, right? I guess that's it in the Eastern tradition too. Once they're a priest, they can't.
In the East, an Eastern man can get married and become a priest, but a priest cannot be.
Right. But like, yeah, at least like, and yeah, so in both traditions, right, if you commit your vow to like the church in that way as a priest, you can't get married, right, because you've committed that vow. You're not free to marry. So there are lots of other examples, but you have to have this freedom of state of life to be able to marry. The other aspect of it is to free consent, right, to marry. So if you had someone, pointing a gun at your head, being like, okay, you have to marry this person. You're like, okay, I'm going to marry the person whether I don't want to die, right? That wouldn't be a valid marriage because you're being coerced into it, right? That's a wild example, but
happens.
It probably happens, unfortunately. Yeah, I haven't heard any personal stories of that, but
me either. But I'm sure it happens.
But yeah, so that essence of like a free consent, it's a free choice between the man and the woman, has to be in play, right? The other element of it too is it has to be public because it's a state of life in the church. It's a total commitment that's public, and people know about it. There need to be witnesses to the thing. You can't just like,
and just to see it here, that's also why we can't get married outside, right?
Right,
like
because
we can't get married on a beach. We can't get married in our house or in a park.
Yeah,
like we actually have to get married in a church in front of our community.
Yeah, there's this reality of pointing it back to God, right? Where it needs to happen in the church because it's a state of life in the church, not just in the public world, but in the church. And so with it happening in the church, with the priest there to bless it and to be a part of it, that's required. And having the witnesses and everything, you see like people like go to the courthouse and they have their witnesses and everything too. Well, the problem with that is with it not pointing back to God, right? Like with this state of life as it being at least sacramental, it needs to be in the church. Now there are stories of people who maybe did go to the courthouse and they did it on a whim, getting married, whatever. They were free to do it, and it was a free choice, and that works, right? So legally in the world, in the United States, right, they're married. But if they come to get to know God and want a relationship with Him and want to be in the church, part of that process will be, okay, like, yeah, once you get baptized or whatever, then like your marriage can be like sacramental, right, and blessed and validated. So we can recognize like a marriage like that has actually happened outside of the church, as like being an actual marriage, right?
And that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's only if you're not Catholic, right?
Yeah.
So like, yes, there's like, so let's say there's two non-Catholics who decide to get married. It could be Protestant. That's pretty fine too. But they get married in a courthouse, right? According to the Catholic Church, that's a natural marriage.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not a they're still married.
Yeah.
Right. But they don't have the sacramental graces that come with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the understanding that I have.
Yeah. And then if a Catholic marries someone who's not Catholic outside the church, then it's actually not a valid marriage. I'm not positive it would still be natural.
Yeah.
But I know it's no longer a valid marriage in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So that's something the church would say no to.
Right. Say that again. So if they're Catholic, if one is Catholic and one is like not even baptized,
if one is not even baptized, then yeah, it's definitely invalid. If one is baptized Protestant,
Protestant.
and Catholic, and they're married outside the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
it's still an invalid marriage.
Right. It has to be within the church, right? In order to be blessed and be recognized as a sacramental, right? Because I've known people, I've had family that where, the husband's Catholic and the wife is maybe comes from a Protestant experience. They can still get married in the Catholic Church. That's still allowed, right?
Right.
And
And that would be sacramental if it's
right.
a baptized person and a Catholic getting married in the Catholic Church. That's a valid marriage.
Yeah.
That's sacramental.
Yeah. So I guess, my encouragement to any couples that are out there, like if you did get married and like it was in the courthouse or whatever, it was on a whim in Vegas or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Come to the church, get it blessed, and come more fully part to get the sacramental graces that you're talking about.
Right.
And then I guess that final kind of condition is being open to life, right? With the complementarity of man and woman, right, in the marriage, right? The ends of marriage are unitive and procreative, right? Marriage, Jesus says, when two people get married, the two become one flesh, right? There's this element of unity when the two come together, and with that also, right, kind of I was hinting at, right, marriage kind of points to the creative element of God, right? That's one of those graces within the sacrament of marriage. And so when you do that, you need to be open to life. If there's this resistance to that, it's really not open to God's life and God's will for your life. Now that, I'm in a situation right now with my wife where we don't have kids yet. We hope to, pray to God, right? That's the hope. And we still have that openness, and we're still practicing. But if there's this element of, okay, like we're going to introduce things, at least in the sexual side of our marriage, where it might close off the possibility of children, that's a no-no, right? So that's part of the process of preparing for marriage, is having those conversations with your wife, with the priest, and being like, okay, like, are you guys in a state of life where you're okay to have kids? Like, that's like a big part of it. So those kind of 4 things. You have to be free in your state of life. You have to be free to consent. It has to be public, especially in the church, right? To be sacramental marriage. And then there has to be this openness to life, because the ends of marriage are unitive and procreative. Right. Those all kind of lend itself to being a Catholic marriage, elevated rather than just getting married in Vegas.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, thank you for breaking that down into those categories that make a valid Catholic marriage. I think our listeners are gonna definitely benefit from that and understanding that, especially as they start to teach their kids and encourage their kids to, pursue this route and start teaching them, like, hey, especially like when you get kids going into college, you get into that age where it's like, okay, if you start dating, you're starting to date someone that you're looking to marry, in college, right? So you want to make sure that they are preparing their minds to, like, okay, let me find someone who's gonna, help me meet these needs that the Catholic Church calls for, because that's what makes a holy marriage and a good lasting marriage.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, how to address that to your kids. But I want to come back to some of these topics just a little bit, and we don't spend a long time because you covered it pretty well. But I do want to talk about, why does a Catholic marriage, or marriage in general, really have to be between a man and a woman?
Yeah,
because that's a big topic we hear today, with LGBTQ stuff going around everywhere. Pride Month's coming around in our backyards. This is something that's very relevant to our society today, and it's part of our political system right now too, right? So this is stuff it's very much involved in our current life. So why is the Catholic Church opposed to same-sex
marriage?
Yeah.
I guess it goes back to that definition of what marriage is, right? Because you can have a kind of legal partnership with another person, right? I think a lot of people would say, okay, well, like if I am experiencing, same-sex attraction, right, and I want to marry this person of the same sex, right? Um, uh, I think the question is, okay, is it really marriage? What is marriage about? Um, because it looks like it might just be like a lifelong partnership that you want to set up. Okay, yeah, it's fair that the world sees that or whatever. But I think the Catholic Church and kind of Jesus challenges, okay, there's like an eternal perspective when it comes to marriage. We have to look at the consequences of what happens in marriage. So in regards to sexuality, right, within like a same-sex marriage, right, there's this element of it where it can't lend itself towards those ends of unitive and procreative. Yeah, they might be like freely consenting to this to this thing happening, and yeah, they might have these feelings toward each other, whatever. And they might even do it in a church. Like that, there might even be a church out there that kind of recognizes it and was like, all right, I'll recognize this partnership. Fine. But in order for it to be marriage, it has to be truly unitive, looking at their bodies, right, and procreative. And that's the issue with same-sex marriage, is that it doesn't lend itself towards those ends, because those ends ultimately point back to God. And people in the world are going to see that as, oh, we're bigoted, we're hateful towards people who experience the same-sex attraction. And I think the reality is, no, it's this idea of really defining what marriage is. I think we can't really control if same-sex couples do get together and have some sort of partnership or whatever. But as Catholics, we can't really say that's marriage. The world might say that and call it marriage, but ultimately this marital act has to be between a man and a woman. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, some of the things I've learned too is, I mean, the whole point of getting married, like you get married to be open to children, like you want to start a family.
Yeah.
Right. And the end of the sexual act, right, is meant to be like, that's what our bodies are designed for.
Yeah.
Right. Is to bring life. Like the love between a man and a woman ought to reflect love between the Trinity.
Yeah.
Which is creative, and if our love is mimicking the Trinity and the Trinity is involved, it's going to be creative too.
Right.
So that's really what the end purpose of sexuality is. It's to gift yourself to the other person.
Yeah.
Knowing the end of their body, like I recognize who you are and I recognize what you're capable of.
Yeah.
For me, like I recognize my wife is capable of being a mother. I owe it to her to give myself to her so that she can fulfill that beautiful gift that she has to be a mother.
Yeah.
And likewise, she gives herself to me so that she can give me fatherhood, because that's the end of my act.
Right.
So,
there's an order to it.
Right.
There's you were saying there's a design, right? And even the Catechism, right, talks about how if you experience same-sex attraction, right, they use the word disordered, right? And a lot of people who might not be in the church might see that and be like, oh, like that's so hateful and that's so mean. Like, don't say that they have a disorder for it. It's not a mean word if you take it just on its face value, or really not face value, but what it really means in regards to how like we have this design about us, how we're created to fit, right? And with that love between man and woman that creates children, right? With the same-sex attraction, there's a kind of disorder. It's not it doesn't make sense, right, in how we're created.
Right.
And that kind of points to this beauty of the true marriage between man and woman, and that creative act. And yeah, I love how you're kind of what you're hitting on it. It kind of fulfills our inherent call to fatherhood and motherhood,
Right.
that each of us is really called to. Even if we don't have children, we're kind of called to step up into those roles in society, which marriage lends itself to.
Right. And I mean, this obviously we live in a society that has a lot of confusion, but this has been around forever. People have had confusion. I mean, having a disordered desire is part of human nature. We all have it, right?
Yeah.
We all have disordered desires in different ways.
Yeah.
Some people experience it sexually. Some people experience it in like, being mean, angry, whatever.
Yeah.
Disordered desire for money, pleasure, as far as like being materialistic. So it's not that we're like singling out like, oh, this is a bad group. Like the church is called to love everyone.
Yeah. And I really want to emphasize, I kind of mentioned up the disorder, and people might assume, okay, so if I have same-sex attraction, that means I'm like sinning just by having the attraction. That's not the case, right? It's how we act upon it, right? So I just want to make that clear. Like,
no, and I wanted you to bring that up because like even as a heterosexual, like you can have disordered attractions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like when I get married, I am bound to my wife. But I could be attracted to the other woman, but I have to control myself.
Yeah.
Like be bound to my wife.
Or it could even be other things, right? We can make other things our gods, right? So like football's in season, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, I might, have responsibilities around the household and to help, lead my kids and my wife to be holy, but like football's around, so I'm gonna like focus all my time on football, right? We kind of make it into a god. We can make even other people into gods in a sense of just like we draw all of our attention into those things. And I think the beauty of just living in the sacrament of marriage is it kind of if lived right and well, it orders us back to God. That's what it's meant to do. The challenge, the husband and wife are meant to challenge each other and build each other up and grow towards God. And our kids are meant to kind of reflect that. Oh, we are also children of God, right? That doesn't end when we become mothers and fathers. And so, there's just so much beauty in the sacrament of marriage, and it's a sanctifying thing in multiple ways. It's not all feeling, like feelings and romanticism, and even though that might be at the beginning, and maybe like feelings like that kind of might dissipate, over time. But I think part of the graces of the sacrament of marriage is hopefully those feelings kind of keep up, right, with the graces, right, and you continue to be reminded of how much you love this person emotionally, but it also kind of gives us endurance and courage and perseverance to continue choosing that person each and every day, which something in like our world today is like if something is hard or if something gives us grief, we can drop it and be like, okay, I want to be happy, right? God would want me to be happy, so let me just drop it. Whereas with a Catholic sacramental marriage is like, no, you're meant to be excellent. God actually even calls us to perfection, and like that beauty of marriage can lead us to that, hopefully.
Right. Yeah, and like you said it perfectly. Like love is not founded on emotions.
Yeah.
Love is a choice.
Yeah. Emotions are good. Like
great,
that make it like very
great.
exciting and whatever.
But they're not always going to be there.
Yeah.
Like there's going to be times where like wake up and I'm like,
I don't feel like it.
You also say like, I don't like you. Right
maybe.
But that's just an emotion. Like I'm just not. Yeah, great. But I'm
Yeah.
still choosing to love you. I'm still going to give my life to you. I'm still going to serve you. I'm still going to, lay down my life for you as I'm called to do.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a choice that you make.
Yeah.
Every day. And that's what love is, right?
Yeah.
It's just
That's right.
fighting through.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
That's right. Don't hurt me, man. Great. So, and this kind of ties in also to like being open to life, right? I mean, we hold why you can't have a same-sex marriage also applies to marriage, because like if you're not open to life, you're in the same boat.
Yeah.
As a person who's trying to pursue a same-sex marriage.
Right.
Right? Because you're like, I'm not gonna be open to marriage. Okay, well you're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Why we can't? Which actually makes it kind of fair, right?
It does. Yeah.
It kind of brings a little justice to it. I think Peter Cruft made that point. It's like our religion is very fair. Like,
right.
We're not gonna say, oh, well you can't get married because you can't have kids, but we're gonna get married even though we're not gonna have kids either, but we can because we're naturally ordered to it. It's like, no, we're saying you have to be open to kids.
Right. Right.
So there is a kind of a justice to it.
That's true. Yeah. The Lord is just and merciful.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Um, which, yeah, I mean, we talked about that, and I think, you know, being open to children is a foundation to marriage, because it's, as we said, it's our end.
Yeah.
It's who we're called to be, and it's going to bring fulfillment.
Yeah.
If you live a life, you know, live a marriage without kids, you know, it's at some point it gets a little like, what's the point of this?
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, it really gets to that. If you start, you know, from the beginning of your marriage, with this idea of no, like let's wait to have kids till we're more financially stable, or where I'm not ready yet emotionally, whatever. Those sorts of things. If your marriage is kind of founded on that, they're gonna kind of take root, and it'll yeah, those kind of like weeds will take root and it'll kind of grow, right? And so it's important, you know, from the beginning to have that right, because, you know, years later you might be married and kind of have that, you know, mindset, and find out, oh, like there's this missing part of me, with not having kids, if you're, you know, immediately closed off of it and are not trying.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Great. Yeah. And so just to move on a little
Yeah.
bit, just because I'm trying to keep these a little shorter. I always go
Sure.
a little longer than I'm
I could
supposed
talk
to.
about this all day.
Me
We
too.
could, yeah.
I could too. But I think we covered enough there that, you know, we gave our audience what the church teaches
Sure.
and all that. But let's go to a little bit of a practical, well, they're all practical questions, but a little more practical question. How someone who is already married or newlyweds or been married for a while and struggling, how can someone pursue a strong Catholic marriage? And like really pursue what it means to have a Catholic marriage.
Yeah, like once you're in the thick of it, how do you keep going, and
Right.
how do you get kind of going back to
Because
how
like
do you keep
before
choosing them?
before I get married, I can always be like, yeah, I get the teachings, I understand the church's teachings on all this stuff. When you get married, it gets a little harder.
Yeah.
Right?
Once you hit the grind, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I firstly want to recommend this book. So early on, even when I was engaged, I don't know where to show it. This way. Boom. Spousal Prayer, by Deacon James Keating. It's a very small, thin book. It was given to me while Maddie and I were engaged, and I read it with a group of guys, and we were all kind of in the same boat, either or, you know, early on married or engaged. It's this beautiful book that kind of talks about how kind of sanctifying your marriage, right? Not just keeping this element of partnership to it, but this the truth of, oh, it's meant to direct us towards God. So some of the things he emphasizes in there are like super important in regards to having, I think, a strong marriage. Now, obviously, we're gonna fail in this. I failed in this so much, but he says if we kind of focus on kind of developing these habits, it'll help us kind of be a strong marriage. So the first thing he kind of emphasizes is this idea that we need to behold our wife. He uses this word behold. Now, when I use the word behold, what do you think of? Like if you just like hear the word behold, like a definition, or like just like what do you think of when someone says behold?
No, I'm trying to think deep.
Or even just like if someone like were to use it like
it's like, look at this glorious thing.
Yeah.
Like,
if someone says behold, right, it's
Right.
like, whoa, this thing is like magnificent.
Yeah.
Or in the mass, right, the priest says, behold the Lamb of God.
Right.
And I've always like heard this word and be like, oh, it sounds so profound and deep and, you know, glorious or whatever. But he emphasizes this point where beholding something is not just seeing them as other and like seeing them there and kind of you know accepting them and kind of receiving them, but like ultimately bringing them into your heart, kind of like sitting with them, right? When we talk about prayer, it's not enough to just like tell God what's going on in our life and you know, go through the kind of set motions. There comes a point where we need to contemplate God and that contemplation is like sitting with him and allowing him to work and allow him to inviting him into your life.
Right.
And uh, similarly, how we can do that in prayer, we can do that in our marriage, where we need to take moments in our day or moments in our week, whatever, where we can behold our spouse. And this can look like a variety of different ways, but like it's so easy to be distracted in our life. Finding ways to remove the distractions, right? I have like a perpetual distraction, like with my phone, right? Something that's so easy to just like look at in regards to responsibilities or even just fun things, whatever, mindless distraction. And my wife will like talk to me, and like I'll just be like focused on a thing, and she'll be like, Daniel, like I want your attention, I want your love. There's this a sense of attention first, but then it's this aspect of we need to choose that person and kind of sit with them for a second. So finding times to do that, and I try to do that like whenever I get home from work, like before I do anything when I get home, like I sit with my wife, or like we do something together where we can just like talk and like be with each other. And yeah, just allow ourselves to kind of like feed into each other. It's so easy to kind of go about our day with like the duties that we need to do, and not take the moment to behold the person. So he kind of like takes that first step. If we don't behold, right, if we lack in that, then we're forced to kind of listen, and we still need to listen to our wife. But that's the second step he gives, is like if we lack in the beholding part, we're forced to kind of listen. And listening is everyone knows what listening is, but this element of like really taking that time to listen to them and to their needs, and not assume that you have the answers, right? I don't know if you can kind of attest to this, but as a husband, sometimes I think like, oh, like my wife is having this problem, I need to figure out the solution, because right like I can't have her be in despair, I can't have her suffering, like I need to like figure this out, I need to be the man, right? But like oftentimes she'll be like, no, I don't need an answer, I just need you to like hear me out, like I need you to hear the words that I'm saying, and to like walk with me in this. And so I think like taking those opportunities of holding the person, receiving them into your heart, and like thinking about them and loving them. But if sometimes we fail, and we will fail in the beholding, taking the time to choose like, hey, like I need to stop what I'm doing, really like take in what they're doing, and listen to them. We're gonna fail in that too, and when we fail in that, we need to be quick to forgive, right? Forgiveness and ask for forgiveness. Constantly and always being I think that's probably, I'm gonna say unfortunately it's probably one of the most popular phrases I use with my wife is I'm sorry, right?
It is the number one phrase I use with my wife.
Like even like I think I love you is up there, but like I'm sorry is sometimes like even like right up there with I love you, because we're going to constantly hurt our spouses, and because we're in this process, in this path of perfection, like in being married and striving for holiness, but we're going to fail, and we have to the I'm sorry is stepping back up and getting back up, right? The moment that we think, oh, like I'm right, I don't need to apologize, and having that pride set in, that's not getting back up and walking, that's kind of like in a sense kind of quitting and giving up. But Jesus says, no, we need to be quick to forgive and ask for forgiveness. So yeah, I think those are like three things, from this book that kind of really, and now obviously like we don't learn everything from a book, but like those are three things that I've really seen in my marriage with Maddie that have really helped us to flourish, is spending that time and receiving and like thinking about one another. That helps keep the feelings towards each other of love alive when we're really like taking that time to choose one another. And then when we fail to do that, like taking the time to listen and really make sure that we understand where they're coming from, where they're at. And then, forgiveness is huge, because when we forgive and ask for forgiveness, we're acting like Christ. all of these things come back to, you know, the cheesy phrase of what would Jesus do, even though it's cheesy, like there's truth to it. And marriage kind of points us to that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, yeah. And I mean, those 3 points are just great for any marriage, right? Like,
Yeah.
Beholding, praying with your spouse,
Yeah.
forgiving. These are things that are going to hold the marriage together and get you through the hard times, because they're going to be hard times.
Yeah.
You got to get through them. And the only way to get through them is with God. You can't do it by yourself.
Yeah. No, 100%. Like you're gonna fail. You're gonna be lost without him.
Yeah.
He brings light to the situation, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
No, it's not me. It's this guy. but it's something that's kind of really been ingrained
Well, you
in our marriage.
memorized
and
it, so
thinking
you have
about
some type of work on that, right?
Huh?
You memorized it, so there's some type of
it.
work in
There you go. That's true. That's true.
Great. So just moving forward a little bit, this is kind of changing topics a little bit, from focusing on marriage to focusing on like one of the fruits of marriage, which is children.
Yeah.
Most of the people listening to this podcast are parents or involved with kids in some way.
Yeah.
Right. You working with high school
schoolers.
kids. You take on a big responsibility there.
Yeah.
They're going through a lot of changes.
Yeah.
Right. What is your advice to parents who have kids who are about to be teenagers, kids who are, going to hit that puberty age?
Yeah.
What is your advice to them on talking to their kids about sexuality, but also helping them prepare to form themselves to be the husband or wife that they are called to be?
Yeah. I think the biggest mistake we can make is to be like, oh, because it's so awkward, like let's avoid the conversation. Let's let them figure it out. If I bring up the conversation about marriage and sexuality and things like that, like they're gonna see me in a weird light. I think unfortunately that's a lot of something that parents kind of struggle with. I think, I don't have kids myself, but I work with high schoolers and I see kind of what they're learning from society, what they're learning from culture. And a lot of them are really like confused about what to do, where to go, and how to process all these things. Even just this past week, we had a confession day for all of our high school students where they could go to confession. And students, before they were even getting in line for confession, they were coming up to me and being like, Mr. Torres, like, I have a question. It's like embarrassing and it might be inappropriate, but it has to do with sin. And I'm like, I don't care if it's inappropriate. I want to hear it, because if it might mean that like you're falling into sin, like I want to hear it. I want to try to give some clarity to it as much as possible. So I'm blessed to be able to be in that role. And it was so good because they had such like important questions. And it pointed to the fact that our kids are so ingrained in a hypersexualized, pornographied culture, where like sex is just so distorted. And so my advice is have conversations early, and frequent, appropriate, but like kids want straight answers. Kids want the truth. They desire it. That's why even when they're little, they ask why. They want to know the truth, right? Now, it needs to be appropriate, and you don't need to, complicate things for them, but give it to them straight. One of the high schoolers was like, when I was in this confession thing, she asked me, what is sodomy? And I was like, okay, this is really weird. Like going into this detail, it might weird her out. She might think like weird things of me. And before I even gave her the answer, I was kind of gonna jump around the bush about it. She was like, just give it to me straight. Like, I want to know. And so I did. And she was like, oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And it's like, no, we need to have those conversations frequently. And we need to be direct about it. I think, whenever there's vagueness, in regards to how we, and get, what sex is for, and what marriage is like, we're going to make assumptions, right? And oftentimes assumptions will lead us astray, especially as kids, right? And so as much as we can, early and direct, because there are like statistics showing that most kids who are, when they're asked how did you learn about sex, they're not saying their parents. They're saying porn. They're saying movies. They're saying TV shows.
Rap stars.
Yeah, music.
Yeah.
They're not saying their parents, and it's like that's kind of sad that they're not learning about the gift of life, and, through the sexual act from the ones who gave them life through the sexual act.
Right.
Like, it's kind of sad, and yeah, like it might be awkward at first, but they're going to appreciate it immensely, and it's going to be worth it.
Yeah, and no, I mean it's definitely better that they learn it from the parents than some pop culture person who's telling them to, like, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And even talking to your kids about it at a younger age before they go through these confusing states, because they can obviously at an age appropriate level.
Yeah.
Right. I want to talk to an 8-year-old like I'm going to talk to a 14-year-old.
Right.
But like introducing them to, like, here's a story of Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Here's a man and a woman loving each other for life, right? If you're, one of the best examples you can do is work on your own marriage.
Yeah.
And they see, like, this is a holy marriage. What I'm seeing out there in the world, look at all the people separating and, like, having millions of different relationships.
Yeah.
But if they can see, like, this, my mom and my dad are working hard to keep this and loving each other.
Yeah.
That's the best example you can have.
Yeah, exactly. If they're kind of going back to that beholding, listening, forgiving, and asking for forgiveness, like if you're like doing that in the presence of your children, right? They're going to see that and they're going to be like, I want that, So yeah, I can't emphasize that more, of just like, yeah, working on your own marriage and allowing that to be a witness. But yeah, still with that lived experience of marriage, they need to be talked to about it, right? Things need to be explained. So yeah, when those questions come up of, yeah, like how does sex work and like all these things, like having the age appropriate conversations, but being direct. And not coming up with stupid words to come up with parts of the human person, like use the actual words because they're going to appreciate it. Like kids are going to be like, oh, that makes sense.
It's something to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
Right. This is something that's part of you.
Yeah. And then when they learn it, and if instead they learn it from one of their peers or whatever that learned from a music video about like how things work, they're going to feel embarrassed because they're going to be like, oh, I didn't know this. Right. So as soon as we can, as parents, do that, the better. It's going to save marriages in the future, like, our kids' marriages and everything.
Yeah. And I mean, for also just loving your kids. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, loving them, being involved in their lives.
Yeah.
Right. Showing them where you have made mistakes, right? Talking about your mistakes is a big thing.
Yeah.
Like if I, my daughters can't really talk yet.
Right.
But as they get older, like I want them to know where I messed up so they don't make the same mistakes.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I don't have a son, but let's say I have a son. Like, here's what I didn't do right on your mom in this part. Try not to do this when you get married.
Yeah.
Like, these are things that kids want to hear and need to hear because they want to hear that vulnerability.
Yeah.
They don't want a parent who's going to be distant from them. It's like, figure it out.
Yeah.
Or like, they'll be okay.
Yeah.
They want a parent who's involved and like telling them about their lives and about the struggles.
Right. And the further temptation might be parents assuming like, oh, like I can't show like my kids when I mess up because I don't want them to think like they have a screw up of a parent, right? Like if I like fail in these things, they're gonna think their parent's a failure and not believe me or whatever. That's not the case. We're not perfect, right? Yeah. And so it's better, especially when you mess up in front of your kids or to your kids. If you hurt them in any way, apologize to them, right? You might think like, oh, because of the parent, I can't apologize because I need to lead them and like they need to know like I'm in charge, whatever. No, like if you mess up, apologize to your kids. Say, I really messed up. Like, you don't deserve that. I love you. I'm going to do better. That will be infinitely, better for them in the long run because, they're going to, when they have their own marriages and have their own kids kind of growing up, they're going to remember that example that you showed of them of, the prideful thing is to just like, be like, no, like I'm good. Learn from your mistake, get up. Like, I'm not gonna, help you. The merciful and Christian thing to do is, I messed up. Like, let me walk through this with you. I think it's so crucial.
And I think just last point, because I know we're running out of time here.
Yeah, no, you're
but what you said is like, I messed up, right? One of the things I'm not accusing anyone of it, I did not accuse myself. Is don't talk bad about your spouse to your kid or to anyone.
Yeah.
Like, that is between you and your spouse.
Yeah.
The more your kids see like you complain about the other one, your spouse, the more they'll be like, what's the point of this?
Yeah. Or they'll even share in that resentment. They'll say that and be like, oh, maybe I need to.
What you should show them is you two working it out. Say, hey, mommy and daddy made a mistake. Here's how we fixed it.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, hey, he did this, and your dad's a jerk.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can be, but
Right, but it's up to the person who is the jerk to ask for forgiveness and to,
right,
move on.
Right,
So.
and so your kids to see that interaction of like, hey, I messed up here, please forgive me, or like, even like saying like, hey, that was not a right thing to do. Can we talk about this?
Yeah.
Like, things that your kids can see, so they can see like, okay, yes, marriage is hard, but you can work through it.
Yeah. And when you do mess up, also too, like saying like I'm sorry, but also being willing to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
And emphasizing that sacrament of confession, knowing that like, okay, Jesus forgives me, I can forgive myself, I can move on, and not kind of like focusing on, oh, I'm such a screw up as a parent because I did this one thing. No, move on from it, ask for forgiveness, move on, because your kids need you to move on and to become better.
Yeah.
Oh,
great.
Yeah.
Thank you for this.
Yeah, this is awesome. I love talking about it. Yeah.
Talk about this forever. Unfortunately, I don't have forever.
Oh, well,
I do actually have to get back to my wife.
That's for heaven. Forever's for heaven. But
I do have to get back to my wife and kids.
That's true.
So, and say hi to them.
Yeah, that'd be good.
But thank you all for watching. Next time we will be discussing the ordination and religious life. So, spiritual vocations.
Beautiful.
Even though marriage is a spiritual vocation, so I guess it would be. How would you describe it?
I don't know. I guess just the other side of a sacrament.
A different vocation.
Yeah. It's still a sacrament of service, but
right.
Just like marriages, but
in a different way.
Different way. Yeah.
So we'll be talking about priesthood, becoming becoming a nun, monks, friars.
Beautiful.
All of it.
Yeah.
So we'll be discussing that, which would be a great thing to talk to your kids about, because it's a good thing to discern whether they're called to it or not. It is a supernatural vocation, so we'll talk about that later. But thank you all again for coming, and we'll see you again next time.
God bless.